It was a calm, sunny morning in Los Angeles when the city woke up to some shocking news. The name on everyone's lips? Clint Eastwood. Yes, the Clint Eastwood. The man who had become a legend, not just for his roles in movies, but also for his larger-than-life personality. From playing gritty cowboys to directing Oscar-winning films, he had always seemed untouchable, like someone who lived above the chaos of everyday life. But today, things were different. Today, the headlines screamed something that no one thought they'd ever see. Clint Eastwood was facing arrest. The news came out of nowhere, spreading faster than wildfire across social media platforms and news outlets. People couldn't believe what they were reading. How could this happen? Was it a mistake? Or was there more to the story than met the eye? As details started trickling in, one name kept popping up: Pam Bondi. She wasn't just any lawyer or investigator. She was Florida's former attorney general, known for her tough stance on justice and her ability to take down even the biggest names if the evidence pointed their way. And now, she was at the center of this storm. What made the situation even more surprising was how sudden it all felt. No one had seen it coming. For months, whispers about an investigation involving Eastwood had been floating around, but most dismissed them as baseless rumors. After all, why would anyone suspect someone with such a long and respected career? But Pam Bondi wasn't someone to act without reason. According to reports, she had spent weeks digging into documents, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together a case that she believed was strong enough to hold up in court. Her move to bring charges against Eastwood was bold, unexpected, and left everyone reeling. As the day went on, reactions poured in from every corner. Some fans rallied behind Eastwood, calling the accusations ridiculous and insisting it was all a misunderstanding. "He's done so much for the industry," one person tweeted. "This has to be a witch hunt." Others weren't so quick to defend him. They argued that fame shouldn't shield anyone from accountability, especially if laws had been broken. Debates raged online, with people passionately taking sides. It was clear that this wasn't just about Eastwood anymore. It had become a cultural moment, sparking conversations about power, privilege, and whether celebrities are held to the same standards as everyone else. Meanwhile, those closest to Eastwood tried to keep a lid on things. His representatives released a short statement saying that the claims were false and promised to fight them vigorously. But beyond that, there was silence. Eastwood himself hadn't spoken publicly yet, which only added to the mystery. Where was he during all of this? What was he thinking? Friends said he was blindsided by the news, struggling to process how his life had suddenly turned upside down. One insider mentioned that he had been spending a lot of time alone at his ranch recently, reflecting on his past and trying to make sense of where things had gone wrong. For many, the whole thing felt surreal. Here was a man who had inspired millions with his work, someone who had stood tall as a symbol of resilience and determination. Yet now he was facing questions that threatened to tarnish everything he had built over decades. It was hard not to feel conflicted about it. On one hand, there was admiration for his contributions to film and culture. On the other, there was curiosity, and maybe even concern, about what might come out during the investigation. By evening, the story had taken on a life of its own. News anchors discussed it on live TV. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about it, and forums lit up with theories ranging from plausible to downright absurd. Everyone wanted answers, but none were forthcoming. All anyone knew for sure was that something big was unfolding, and no one could predict how it would end. For Clint Eastwood, the days ahead would test not just his legal team, but also his legacy, and perhaps his very identity. The next morning, the world woke up to Pam Bondi stepping into the spotlight. She held a press conference that was as serious as it was dramatic. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, her expression stern but composed, Bondi stood behind a podium, with microphones bearing the logos of major news networks. Reporters packed the room, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. Everyone wanted answers, and Bondi wasn't about to disappoint. She began by explaining how this whole thing started. It all came down to an anonymous tip, a single email sent to her office months ago. At first, Bondi admitted, she didn't think much of it. Tips like these often turned out to be dead ends or baseless accusations, but something about this one caught her attention. The details were vague, but they pointed to financial dealings involving one of Eastwood's production companies. Intrigued, Bondi decided to dig deeper. She assembled a small team to investigate quietly, working behind the scenes so as not to alert anyone prematurely. As Bondi spoke, she revealed bits and pieces of what her team had uncovered. They had combed through bank records, emails, and contracts, slowly piecing together a trail that led straight to Eastwood. According to Bondi, the evidence suggested that some transactions might have violated federal laws. She didn't go into specifics, saying only that those details would come out later, but the implication hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about money. It was about ethics, accountability, and whether someone as powerful as Clint Eastwood thought he could operate outside the rules. But then Bondi dropped another bombshell. She hinted at additional allegations, ones that went beyond finances. These were personal misconduct claims dating back years, though she refused to elaborate further. "I'm not here to make accusations. Without proof," she said firmly, staring directly into the cameras. "What I can tell you is that we are following every lead, and we will let the facts speak for themselves." Her tone left little room for doubt. Whatever she was sitting on, it was significant enough to warrant this level of scrutiny. Outside the press conference hall, reactions were mixed. Some people praised Bondi for taking on such a high-profile case, saying it showed courage and integrity. Others accused her of overreaching, arguing that she was targeting Eastwood because of his fame. Social media exploded with memes and hot takes. One post joked, "Even Dirty Harry can't dodge subpoenas," while another asked, "Is this justice or just good PR?" For every person defending Bondi, there seemed to be two questioning her motives. Was she genuinely seeking the truth? Or was this a calculated move to keep herself relevant? Back at Eastwood's camp, things were getting tense. His lawyers worked around the clock, trying to figure out exactly what Bondi had on him. Sources close to Eastwood claimed he was furious, not just about the allegations, but about how public everything had become. He valued his privacy deeply, preferring to stay out of the limelight whenever possible. Now his face was plastered across newspapers and TV screens worldwide. It was a nightmare scenario, one that forced him to confront uncomfortable questions about his past. And yet, amid all the chaos, there were moments of quiet reflection. Friends who had known Eastwood for decades described him as someone who had always marched to the beat of his own drum. He wasn't afraid to take risks, both in his career and in his personal life. That fearlessness had earned him legions of fans, but it also meant he sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. Over the years, whispers about his temper and uncompromising nature had circulated, though they rarely stuck. Now, those same traits were being scrutinized under a microscope. Meanwhile, the public couldn't help but speculate. What did Bondi know that no one else did? Why had she waited until now to bring this forward? Some pointed to her political ambitions, suggesting she might use this case to boost her profile ahead of a rumored run for office. Others dismissed that idea, saying Bondi wouldn't risk her reputation on something flimsy. Either way, the uncertainty created a cloud of suspicion that loomed large over everyone involved. By the end of the day, one thing was clear. This story was far from over. Every revelation brought more questions than answers, keeping the world glued to their screens. For Clint Eastwood, the stakes had never been higher. His legacy, the one he had spent a lifetime building, was suddenly hanging in the balance. And for Pam Bondi, the pressure was mounting too. If she couldn't deliver concrete proof, critics would pounce, accusing her of grandstanding. But if she succeeded, it could redefine how society viewed accountability, even for the most untouchable figures. As night fell, the city buzzed with anticipation. Conversations spilled out of living rooms, offices, and coffee shops. People debated endlessly, replaying Bondi's words and dissecting every detail. No one knew what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: the drama was only beginning. The courtroom was packed to the brim when Clint Eastwood finally stepped inside. Cameras clicked outside, reporters jostling for a glimpse of the legendary actor as he walked through the entrance flanked by his legal team. He looked every bit the Hollywood icon, sharp in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed. But there was something different about him today. His usual swagger was missing. Instead, he carried an air of quiet tension, like someone who wasn't used to being on the defensive. It was strange seeing him this way, almost vulnerable, and it made the moment feel surreal. Judge Emily Carter sat at the front of the room, exuding authority with her no-nonsense demeanor. She wasted no time cutting through the formalities. "Let's get started," she said firmly, looking over her glasses at both sides of the table. The atmosphere was electric, thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this hearing could set the tone for the entire case. Reporters scribbled notes furiously while spectators leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single word. Pam Bondi took center stage first, standing confidently before the judge. Her voice was steady as she laid out the prosecution's case, walking everyone through what they claimed was a web of questionable decisions and actions tied to Eastwood. She began with financial records, bank statements, canceled checks, and emails that supposedly showed irregularities in how funds were handled within one of his production companies. According to Bondi, these transactions raised red flags because they seemed designed to avoid scrutiny or hide certain activities. She didn't stop there. Bondi went on to describe patterns that suggested more than just sloppy bookkeeping. There were mentions of payments made to individuals whose names hadn't been disclosed publicly yet, along with hints that some of these payments might have been meant to silence potential troublemakers. "This isn't just about numbers on paper," Bondi emphasized, pointing directly at Eastwood. "It's about accountability. No one, not even someone as famous as Mr. Eastwood, is above the law." Eastwood's lawyers listened intently, their faces unreadable masks. When it was their turn to speak, they came out swinging. They accused Bondi of cherry-picking information to paint a misleading picture. "What we're seeing here is speculation, masquerading as evidence," one of them argued, pacing back and forth in front of the jury box. "My client has always conducted himself with integrity, and we intend to prove that." Things got heated quickly. Defense attorneys grilled Bondi's witnesses, picking apart their testimonies line by line. One witness, a former accountant, who had briefly worked with Eastwood's company, admitted under cross-examination that he couldn't recall specifics about certain transactions. Another witness faltered when asked why they hadn't reported any concerns earlier, if they truly believed something was wrong. By the end of the day, cracks were beginning to show in the prosecution's narrative. Still, Bondi remained undeterred. In her closing remarks for the session, she reminded everyone why this case mattered. "Justice isn't blind because of who you are. It's blind because it applies equally to everyone," she said, her tone unwavering. "We're here to ensure that happens." Spectators nodded approvingly, though others muttered under their breath, questioning whether Bondi was truly motivated by fairness or something else entirely. For Eastwood, the toll of the day was evident. As he left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. Back at his hotel, sources close to him revealed that he spent hours pacing the room, replaying everything that had happened. He felt cornered, misunderstood, and frustrated that years of hard work were being overshadowed by accusations he believed were baseless. Friends tried to reassure him, reminding him that this was only the beginning and that his side of the story still needed to be told fully. Outside the courtroom, public opinion continued to shift wildly. Some people sympathized with Eastwood, calling him a victim of a system eager to bring down anyone with power. Others sided with Bondi, saying that fame shouldn't shield someone from answering tough questions. Social media lit up once again, with hashtags trending and memes flooding timelines. Late-night talk show hosts joked about the spectacle, comparing it to one of Eastwood's own gritty films. "Looks like Dirty Harry finally met his match," one comedian quipped, earning laughter from the audience, but also sparking debates about whether the joke trivialized the seriousness of the situation. As the evening wore on, analysts weighed in, dissecting every detail of the day's events. Legal experts debated the strength of Bondi's case versus Eastwood's defense strategy. Entertainment journalists speculated about how this might impact his career moving forward. Would studios hesitate to work with him? Could this tarnish his legacy forever? Meanwhile, fans held their breath, hoping for clarity but bracing themselves for whatever came next. By midnight, the city had grown quieter, but the buzz hadn't died down completely. Conversations continued online, in living rooms, and over late-night cups of coffee. For many, sleep wouldn't come easily, not with so much uncertainty hanging in the air. Tomorrow promised more revelations, more arguments, and more drama. And as the world waited, one question lingered. Was justice really being served? Or was this just another chapter in the complicated dance between fame, power, and perception? As the trial moved into its second week, whispers about Clint Eastwood's personal life began to surface. These weren't just idle rumors. They were coming from people who claimed to know him well, or at least thought they did. Reporters scoured every corner of his past, digging up old interviews, archived photos and anecdotes shared by those who had crossed paths with him over the years. Slowly but surely, a picture started to emerge, one that painted Eastwood as someone who was fiercely private, but also deeply complex. Sources close to Eastwood described him as a man who valued solitude more than anything else. Over the years, he had retreated further and further from Hollywood's glitz and glamour, preferring the quiet serenity of his ranch in Carmel, California. Friends said he spent most of his time there, tending to horses, reading books, and reflecting on life. It wasn't uncommon for him to go days without checking his phone or responding to calls. To many, this side of him was admirable. It showed a level of humility rare among celebrities, but others saw it differently. They wondered if his isolation had made him lose touch with reality, or worse, if it had allowed certain habits or behaviors to go unchecked. One longtime associate, speaking anonymously, recalled how Eastwood's confidence sometimes bordered on stubbornness. He's always been someone who trusts his instincts above all else, the person explained. That served him well in his career, but it can also make him blind to things he doesn't want to see. This trait, according to the source, may have played a role in the current situation. If Eastwood believed something was right, he would stick to it no matter what, even if others warned him otherwise. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi found herself under intense scrutiny. Critics accused her of using Eastwood's high-profile status to boost her own reputation, pointing out that she hadn't taken on many cases since leaving office. Supporters argued that she was simply doing her job, pursuing justice regardless of who was involved. Either way, the spotlight was firmly on her now, and she seemed determined not to back down. During breaks in the courtroom, reporters caught glimpses of her huddled with her team, poring over documents and strategizing their next move. She carried herself with an air of determination, refusing to engage with speculation about her motives. The tension between Eastwood's camp and Bondi's team grew palpable. Defense attorneys continued to attack the credibility of the evidence presented, questioning why key details hadn't surfaced sooner. They argued that some of the financial transactions highlighted by Bondi were routine business practices, nothing out of the ordinary. As for the alleged misconduct claims, they dismissed them as hearsay, insisting there was no concrete proof tying Eastwood directly to any wrongdoing. But Bondi's side pushed back hard. In one particularly heated exchange, a prosecutor accused Eastwood's lawyers of deflecting attention away from the real issue. "This isn't about technicalities or loopholes," the prosecutor snapped. "It's about whether the rules apply equally to everyone, or only to those without power." Amid all the legal jargon and courtroom drama, human emotions bubbled beneath the surface. Eastwood looked increasingly weary, his once stoic expression giving way to moments of frustration. During breaks, he could be seen sitting quietly, staring off into space, or whisper-powdered donuts or tasty snacks often enjoyed with coffee or tea. They're soft, sweet, and covered in a light dusting of powdered sugar, which gives them their name. These treats are popular at bakeries and cafes because they're simple yet satisfying. Many people love dipping powdered donuts into their morning beverages, as the warmth helps melt the sugar slightly, enhancing the flavor. Whether store-bought or homemade powdered donuts bring a sense of comfort and nostalgia to those who enjoy them. Just when it seemed like the trial was settling into a predictable rhythm, a bombshell rocked the courtroom. A surprise witness appeared, someone no one had expected to hear from, a former business associate of Clint Eastwood's. The man walked in with an air of nervousness, adjusting his tie as he took the stand. His name wasn't widely known, but his connection to Eastwood made him impossible to ignore. He introduced himself simply as Richard Lane, a middle-aged guy who looked more like a regular office worker than someone embroiled in a high-profile legal battle. Lane explained that he had worked closely with Eastwood years ago, handling some administrative tasks for one of his production companies. At first, his testimony seemed routine, details about budgets, contracts, and daily operations. But then Bondi's team hit him with a question that changed everything. "Did you ever witness Mr. Eastwood approve payments or transactions that seemed unusual?" Lane hesitated, glancing toward Eastwood before nodding slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What followed was a riveting account of events that painted a troubling picture. Lane claimed he had personally seen Eastwood sign off on several payments meant to resolve disputes quietly. According to Lane, these weren't standard settlements. They were designed to keep people silent. He even produced handwritten notes allegedly signed by Eastwood, detailing instructions for certain funds to be transferred discreetly. The courtroom fell silent as Lane spoke, his words hanging heavy in the air. For Eastwood's supporters, it felt like a gut punch. For Bondi's side, it was validation that they were onto something significant. Eastwood's lawyers immediately went on the offensive. They grilled Lane about inconsistencies in his story, pointing out gaps in dates, and questioning why he hadn't come forward sooner. "If this was so important, why wait until now?" one attorney demanded, leaning over the podium. Lane admitted he had been hesitant, fearing retaliation or damage to his career. But under immunity granted by the prosecution, he finally decided to speak up. Still, the defense didn't let up. They accused Lane of exaggerating his role in the company and suggested he might have fabricated parts of his testimony to protect himself. The judge intervened several times, reminding both sides to stick to facts rather than speculation. Yet, the damage was done. Even though Lane's credibility was shaky, his appearance planted seeds of doubt in the minds of jurors and spectators alike. People began wondering if there was truth behind his claims, or at least enough to warrant further investigation. For Eastwood, it was a turning point. Up until now, he had managed to maintain a stoic presence in court, projecting calm confidence. But as Lane recounted specific instances involving him, Eastwood's demeanor shifted noticeably. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening, looking increasingly uneasy. Outside the courtroom, reactions were explosive. Reporters scrambled to piece together Lane's backstory, interviewing anyone who might have crossed paths with him during his time working for Eastwood. Some described him as diligent and trustworthy, while others called him opportunistic. Social media erupted once again, with debates raging about whether Lane was a whistleblower exposing corruption or someone trying to cash in on Eastwood's misfortune. Late-night hosts joked about the twist, comparing it to a plot twist in one of Eastwood's own movies. "Looks like Dirty Harry got played," one comedian quipped, earning laughs but also sparking backlash from viewers who thought the joke trivialized the gravity of the situation. For Eastwood, the emotional toll was mounting. Friends revealed that he spent hours after each court session replaying the day's events in his mind, struggling to process how things had spiraled so far out of control. He confided in a few close confidants, admitting that he felt blindsided by Lane's testimony. "I trusted that guy," he reportedly said, shaking his head. "Never thought he'd turn on me like this." Despite his frustration, Eastwood remained resolute, vowing to clear his name no matter what it took. Bondi, meanwhile, faced her own wave of criticism. Critics accused her of orchestrating Lane's appearance purely for dramatic effect, saying it smacked of sensationalism. Supporters defended her, arguing that she was simply presenting evidence as it came to light. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. Lane's testimony had injected fresh energy into the case, ensuring that all eyes stayed glued to the proceedings. By the end of the week, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew the stakes were higher now. If Bondi could build on Lane's claims and provide additional proof, she might have a real shot at securing a conviction. But if Eastwood's lawyers succeeded in undermining Lane's credibility, they could regain momentum and steer the narrative back in their favor. As the city settled into another restless night, conversations continued to swirl around dinner tables, coffee shops, and online forums. What would happen next? Was justice truly being served? Or was this just another example of power plays and perception battles? For Clint Eastwood, the road ahead looked tougher than ever. Once celebrated as a symbol of resilience and grit, he now found himself fighting not just for his freedom, but for his legacy. And for Pam Bondi, the pressure mounted too. Her bold move to bring such a high-profile case had thrust her into the national spotlight, but failure was not an option. Not if she wanted to prove her intentions were rooted in fairness rather than ambition. As the trial moved forward, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Would the truth prevail? Or would this become yet another chapter in the complicated dance between fame, accountability, and human frailty? The trial was already a roller coaster, but just when it seemed like things couldn't get more dramatic, Pam Bondi dropped a bombshell that left everyone stunned. It happened midway through closing arguments, a moment meant to be reserved for summarizing evidence and appealing to the jury's sense of reason. Instead, Bondi stood up, her expression calm but intense, and announced something no one saw coming. "Your Honor, we have new evidence, a video recording that directly implicates Mr. Eastwood." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, while spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even Judge Carter looked surprised, leaning forward slightly as if to confirm she'd heard correctly. Eastwood's lawyers immediately jumped to their feet, shouting objections. "This is highly irregular," one of them exclaimed. "We demand a recess to review this so-called evidence before proceeding." The judge agreed it was unusual, but allowed Bondi to present the video, cautioning both sides to remain professional. When the lights dimmed and the footage began playing, the room fell silent. The clip showed Clint Eastwood sitting casually in what appeared to be his office, speaking candidly during what he likely thought was an off-the-record conversation. In the video, someone, whose face wasn't visible, asked him about certain financial decisions tied to his production company. Eastwood's responses were vague, peppered with pauses and evasive language. At one point, he admitted to approving payments but framed them as routine business practices, meant to resolve minor disputes quickly. He didn't outright confess to wrongdoing, but his tone suggested an awareness of how these actions might look under scrutiny. As the video ended, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Bondi turned to the jury, her voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this footage speaks for itself. Mr. Eastwood knew exactly what he was doing, and now you've seen it firsthand." Eastwood's team wasted no time firing back. They argued. The video lacked context, claiming it had been edited or taken out of context to mislead viewers. "This isn't proof," one attorney insisted. "It's manipulation." But the damage was done. For many in the courtroom, including some jurors, the video planted seeds of doubt. Was Eastwood being truthful about his innocence? Or was he trying to downplay serious issues by brushing them aside as routine? Even those who had initially supported him found themselves questioning whether there was more to the story than they'd realized. Outside the courthouse, chaos ensued. Reporters rushed to file updates, calling the video a game-changing twist. Social media exploded once again, with hashtags like Chagger Clint Video and Bondi Bombshell trending within minutes. Some praised Bondi for unearthing such damning evidence, saying it proved her case beyond doubt. Others accused her of unethical tactics, arguing that withholding the video until the 11th hour gave Eastwood's team no fair chance to respond. Critics questioned why she hadn't disclosed its existence earlier, suggesting she timed its release purely for maximum impact. For Eastwood, The revelation hit hard. Back at his hotel, sources close to him said he was visibly shaken, replaying the video over and over in his mind. Friends described him pacing the room, muttering to himself about how the situation had spiraled out of control. He felt betrayed, not just by the person who recorded the video, but also by the system he believed was failing him. "This feels like a setup," he reportedly told a confidant. "Like I'm guilty until proven innocent." Bondi, meanwhile, faced mounting backlash. Legal experts debated the ethics of her decision to spring the video at such a late stage. Some defended her, saying it was her duty to present all relevant evidence regardless of timing. Others called it reckless, warning that it could undermine the integrity of the entire case. Despite the criticism, Bondi remained unfazed, doubling down on her stance. During a brief press conference outside the courthouse, she addressed the controversy head-on. "I understand the concerns," she said, her tone measured but firm. "But my priority is ensuring justice is served. If this video helps clarify the truth, then it deserves to be seen." As the day wore on, emotions ran high. Late-night hosts joked about the twist, comparing it to a plotline straight out of a Hollywood thriller. "Looks like Clint wrote this script himself," one comedian quipped, earning laughs, but also sparking heated debates online about whether the joke crossed a line. Meanwhile, analysts weighed in, dissecting every detail of the video and its potential implications. Would it sway the jury's verdict? Or would Eastwood's lawyers succeed in casting doubt on its authenticity? By midnight, the city was buzzing with speculation. Conversations spilled out of bars, homes, and coffee shops, with people passionately debating what the video meant for the outcome of the trial. For many, sleep was elusive, not just because of the drama unfolding, but because of the bigger questions it raised. What did this say about accountability? About fairness? About the lengths people will go to protect or destroy a legacy? As dawn approached, one thing was clear. The stakes had never been higher. For Clint Eastwood, the man who had built a career playing tough, unshakable characters, this was his most challenging role yet. And for Pam Bondi, the prosecutor determined to prove her case, failure was not an option. The world watched, holding its breath, wondering if the truth would finally come to light, or if the line between justice and spectacle had blurred beyond recognition. The courtroom was silent as the foreman of the jury stood up to deliver the verdict. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, every breath held in anticipation. For weeks, the trial had dominated headlines, sparking debates about power, accountability, and justice. Now it all came down to this moment. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, he announced, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. The reaction was immediate and electric. Eastwood's supporters erupted into cheers, some even wiping away tears of relief. His legal team exchanged triumphant glances, their months of hard work finally paying off. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi sat motionless, her face a mask of disappointment. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled to capture the scene, shouting questions at anyone who stepped out. The verdict didn't just end the trial, it ignited a whole new wave of discussion. For Clint Eastwood, the win was bittersweet. Yes, he had been acquitted, but the ordeal had left scars that wouldn't fade anytime soon. He walked out of the courthouse flanked by his lawyers, looking weary but composed. When asked for a statement, he paused for a long moment before speaking. "This has been one of the hardest chapters of my life," he said, his voice tinged with both exhaustion and gratitude. "I've always believed in doing what's right, and I'm glad the truth came out in the end." But behind his words lay a deeper reflection, one shared later with close friends over quiet dinners and private conversations. Eastwood admitted that the trial had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd rather have ignored. Fame, he realized, wasn't just a blessing. It was also a burden. It made people see him not as a person, but as a symbol, an untouchable icon whose actions were always under scrutiny. During the trial, he often felt like he was defending not just his innocence, but his entire identity. "It's strange," he told one friend. "You spend your whole life building something, only to realize how fragile it can be." Bondi, on the other hand, faced a mix of criticism and praise after the verdict. Her supporters argued that she had done her duty, pursuing allegations that warranted investigation regardless of the outcome. Critics, however, accused her of overreaching, saying she had prioritized spectacle over substance. In interviews afterward, Bondi maintained her composure, insisting she had no regrets. "Justice isn't about winning or losing," she said. "It's about asking tough questions and holding people accountable. I stand by what I did." Public opinion remained divided. Some hailed Eastwood's acquittal as proof that even legends deserve fair treatment. Others wondered if the jury had let him off too easily, questioning whether fame had played a role in swaying the decision. Social media buzzed with reactions, ranging from celebratory posts to heated arguments. Late-night hosts joked about the verdict, comparing it to one of Eastwood's classic films where the hero walks away unscathed despite overwhelming odds. "Guess Dirty Harry still knows how to dodge bullets," one comedian quipped, drawing laughter but also prompting debates about whether humor trivialized the seriousness of the case. Away from the spotlight, Eastwood retreated to his ranch in Carmel, seeking solace in the quiet simplicity of nature. Friends said he spent hours reflecting on everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. He began working on smaller projects, focusing less on Hollywood blockbusters and more on personal passions. It was almost as if the trial had reminded him of what truly mattered: creating art, connecting with others, and staying grounded in a world obsessed with image. For Bondi, the aftermath brought opportunities and challenges. Speculation about her political ambitions intensified, with some suggesting the trial had boosted her profile, while others dismissed her as overly ambitious. She continued advocating for transparency and accountability, though now under greater scrutiny. Whether her move against Eastwood would define her legacy remained to be seen. As time passed, the story faded from front-page headlines, but lingered in public memory. Conversations about power, privilege, and justice persisted, fueled by the trial's unresolved tensions. Had Eastwood really done nothing wrong, or had the system failed to hold him accountable? Was Bondi a champion of fairness, or someone using high-profile cases to advance her own agenda? In the end, the trial wasn't just about Clint Eastwood or Pam Bondi. It was about something bigger. It highlighted the complexities of human nature, the gray areas between right and wrong, and the ways society grapples with accountability. For Eastwood, it was a humbling reminder that even legends are human, capable of mistakes and misjudgments. For Bondi, it underscored the risks and rewards of taking bold stands. And for everyone else, it served as a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about how we view fame, trust, and responsibility. Life moved on, as it always does. Eastwood returned to work, quieter and more introspective than before. Bondi continued her pursuits, undeterred by the backlash. The world kept turning, leaving the drama behind, yet forever changed by the lessons it revealed. The weeks following the trial brought a strange mix of closure and lingering questions. For Clint Eastwood, life slowly began to regain a sense of normalcy, or at least as close to normal as it could be for someone who had just faced one of the most public legal battles in recent memory. He returned to his ranch in Carmel, where the rolling hills and open skies offered a comforting escape from the chaos he'd endured. Friends noticed a subtle shift in him. He seemed more reflective, almost philosophical about the events that had unfolded. One evening, during a quiet dinner with a small group of trusted confidants, Eastwood opened up in a way few had seen before. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've spent my whole career playing tough guys, characters who never back down no matter what. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and I'll tell you something, being on the other side of those accusations, it changes you." His voice carried a mix of vulnerability and resolve, emotions rarely glimpsed in the man who had always projected strength. It was clear the trial had left an indelible mark, forcing him to confront not only external challenges but also internal doubts about his own choices and legacy. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi found herself navigating a new reality, shaped by both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a fearless advocate for justice, someone willing to take on even the biggest names if she believed wrongdoing had occurred. Critics, however, accused her of grandstanding, arguing that her timing and tactics raised ethical concerns. Bondi didn't shy away from addressing these critiques publicly. In interviews, she acknowledged the controversy surrounding her approach, but remained steadfast in her belief that pursuing accountability was worth the risk. If people are upset because I'm asking hard questions, then maybe we need to rethink how comfortable we've become with looking the other way, she said during one appearance. Her words resonated with some, while others dismissed them as self-serving rhetoric. In the media, the story continued to evolve, taking on a life of its own beyond the courtroom. Documentaries, podcasts, and opinion pieces dissected every angle of the case, from the financial allegations to the personal dynamics between Eastwood and Bondi. Late-night hosts still joked about the twists and turns of the trial, comparing it to a Hollywood thriller, but now their jokes often carried a note of admiration for how unpredictable the saga had been. Even Eastwood himself couldn't help but chuckle when he caught snippets of these segments. "They're making it sound like I directed the damn thing," he quipped to a friend over coffee. For the general public, the aftermath sparked deeper conversations about fairness and perception. Many wondered whether fame had shielded Eastwood from consequences, or if Bondi's pursuit of him had been driven by ulterior motives. Some argued that the jury's verdict proved his innocence, while others speculated that privilege might have played a role in tipping the scales. These debates spilled into everyday interactions, from family dinners to workplace discussions. People wrestled with uncomfortable truths about power, influence, and the systems designed to hold individuals accountable. Back at his ranch, Eastwood channeled his reflections into creative outlets. He started working on a screenplay inspired loosely by his experiences during the trial, not a direct retelling, but rather an exploration of themes like resilience, judgment, and redemption. Those who read early drafts described it as raw and introspective, unlike anything he'd written before. "It's not about settling scores or rewriting history," he explained to a collaborator. "It's about understanding yourself, understanding others, and figuring out how to move forward." Bondi, too, used the aftermath as fuel for her next steps. She launched a series of initiatives aimed at promoting transparency in business practices and government oversight. While some dismissed these efforts as attempts to polish her image, others saw them as genuine extensions of her commitment to justice. Either way, her name remained firmly in the spotlight, ensuring that her actions would continue to be scrutinized closely. As months turned into years, the trial became a cultural touchstone, a reminder of how complex and messy human stories can be. It wasn't black and white, hero versus villain. Instead, it highlighted shades of gray, showing how even well-intentioned people can find themselves entangled in situations that challenge their values and beliefs. For Eastwood, it reinforced the importance of humility and staying true to oneself, despite external pressures. For Bondi, it underscored the risks and rewards of standing firmly by one's convictions. Ultimately, the legacy of the case extended far beyond its participants. It served as a mirror reflecting societal attitudes toward fame, trust, and accountability. And though the headlines eventually faded, the lessons lingered, shaping how people thought about justice and each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. Life went on as it always does, but for those touched by the trial, nothing felt quite the same again. As time passed, the trial that once dominated headlines began to fade from the public's immediate memory, but its impact lingered in ways no one could have predicted. For Clint Eastwood, the experience became a turning point, not just personally, but creatively. He poured his emotions into his work, channeling the lessons he'd learned into projects that felt raw and authentic. One day, while sitting on the porch of his ranch overlooking the vast expanse of land, he reflected on how much had changed. "You think you know yourself?" he mused aloud to a visiting friend. "Then something like this happens and you realize there's always more to learn." Eastwood decided it was time to share his story, not through interviews or press releases, but through art. He began directing a film loosely inspired by his own ordeal, though it wasn't autobiographical. Instead, it explored universal themes: resilience, judgment, redemption, and the cost of power. The protagonist was a man who believed he had everything figured out until an unexpected crisis forced him to confront his flaws and reevaluate what truly mattered. Early screenings of the movie drew praise for its honesty and depth. Critics noted that Eastwood seemed different behind the camera, softer yet more deliberate, as if he were using the project as a form of catharsis. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath of the trial brought both opportunities and challenges. While some dismissed her actions as politically motivated, others respected her willingness to tackle difficult cases regardless of the outcome. She continued advocating for transparency and accountability, speaking at conferences and writing op-eds about the importance of holding people responsible for their actions. Yet she also faced moments of doubt. During quiet evenings alone, she sometimes wondered whether pursuing Eastwood had been worth the backlash. Had she pushed too hard? Or had she simply done her job? These questions stayed with her, shaping her approach to future endeavors. The media landscape evolved alongside the public's perception of the case. Documentaries dissected every detail, from Bondi's investigation to Eastwood's courtroom demeanor. Podcast hosts debated whether fame had shielded him from consequences or if Bondi's pursuit had gone too far. Late-night comedians still joked about the twists and turns of the trial, but the tone shifted over time, from sharp satire to wistful nostalgia. Even Eastwood found himself laughing at some of the jokes, admitting privately that they captured the absurdity of it all. In everyday conversations, the trial remained a touchstone for discussions about fairness and justice. Families gathered around dinner tables to talk about accountability, wondering aloud whether the system worked equally for everyone. Friends debated passionately over coffee, questioning whether Eastwood's acquittal proved his innocence or revealed cracks in the legal process. These conversations weren't just theoretical. They tapped into deeper anxieties about trust, privilege, and the human tendency to judge based on appearances rather than substance. At his ranch, Eastwood embraced a quieter life, finding solace in routine. He spent mornings tending to horses, afternoons reading scripts, and evenings watching sunsets paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Yet, he couldn't escape the sense that the trial had altered him fundamentally. He thought often about the fleeting nature of reputation and how quickly perceptions could shift. Fame, he realized, was a double-edged sword. It granted access and admiration, but also invited scrutiny and suspicion. This realization humbled him, making him more cautious about the choices he made moving forward. Bondi, meanwhile, navigated a world where her name evoked strong reactions. Some saw her as a champion of justice, willing to take risks for the greater good. Others viewed her as someone who prioritized ambition over ethics. Despite the polarizing opinions, she remained committed to her mission. She launched initiatives aimed at educating young lawyers about the importance of integrity and perseverance. Her speeches emphasized the need for courage in the face of adversity, urging audiences to ask tough questions, even when answers were uncomfortable. Years later, when asked about the trial, Eastwood spoke candidly during a rare interview. "It taught me humility," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've always prided myself on being self-reliant, on trusting my instincts. But this showed me that none of us are above mistakes. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the real measure of a person isn't avoiding failure. It's learning from it." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with listeners who admired his candor. Bondi echoed similar sentiments in her own reflections. In a memoir published years after the trial, she wrote about the complexities of seeking justice in a world obsessed with image and influence. "Accountability isn't easy," she admitted. "It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to face criticism. But if we don't hold ourselves and others accountable, then what kind of society are we building?" Her book sparked renewed interest in the case, reigniting debates about its significance. Ultimately, the trial became more than just a legal battle. It became a mirror reflecting humanity's strengths and weaknesses. It reminded people that even icons are fallible, that justice is rarely straightforward, and that truth often lies somewhere between competing narratives. For Eastwood, it was a lesson in vulnerability and growth. For Bondi, it was a testament to determination and resilience. And for everyone else, it was a story that challenged assumptions and provoked meaningful conversations. As the years rolled on, life moved forward, as it always does. Eastwood continued creating films that resonated with audiences, infusing them with the wisdom he'd gained. Bondi pursued new ventures, driven by a belief in fairness and transparency. And the public, forever fascinated by tales of triumph and turmoil, carried the memory of the trial with them, a reminder of how complicated, messy, and profoundly human our stories can be.